We're here with Irishman James Whelton, who I've known for the last 7 or 8 years. He founded CoderDojo, which I like to think of as this open source framework for teaching children how to code. It's essentially classes all over the world, 100 countries, almost 2,000 of these CoderDojos, and close to 500,000 students. Children who have learned how to code thanks to the work of Mr. Whelton here, who started out as a hacker, not always up to with the best intentions, but when you look in the final analysis, I think he's done some net good for the world. I'd like to know, I mean, I can't think of a country I've visited, including Norway, that doesn't have a dojo of the coder variety. And how did this even come about?
So I started programming quite a young age, and I come from Cork in Ireland, which represents. Academically, I was horrible, and it was very frustrating. I started making websites when I was about 9 years old, much to the bemusement of my parents, who were both dentists, almost the point of throwing holy water. Growing up, while I was building apps and websites and all sorts of things, and largely self-teaching, like saving up pocket money and buying books, academically I was dreadful, and teachers were kicking me out of classes. You know, there wasn't much hope, and it was very frustrating that this thing that I did enjoy and I was good at had no representation in school. And coupled with that, there was no one else I knew my age who was doing it or interested in it, and there was nowhere for me really to learn. So I think I grew out of an experience of being academically poor and having difficulty learning in that conventional way when it isn't project orientated, or maybe you can't really necessarily see the immediate value of it, coupled with creating that outlet for young people. And then when we did create it and it became accessible, it got a lot of attention.
That's amazing. Tell me something, because I know it's come up a lot. It's some work that I've done about. We all understand that there's a discrepancy with respect to the number of women involved in technology. Mm-hmm. Do you see any seeds of this already at the level of with these kids who are 5, 6 years old? What do we have? Do we have 50-50 boys and girls?
Yeah, I think in many CoderDojos you do have 50-50. In some places you do have maybe 30-70, or there are some CoderDojos that are specifically for girls only. I think from what we've seen is having the environment, and now it's not an experience that I've personally gone through, so I'd be kind of cautious to comment, but from talking to a lot of female champions and a lot of members of the movement who are female, and our team in the foundation, I think by having an environment where you have a lot of peers who are female, you have a lot of mentors and really idols who are female and champions of it, and it becomes much more relatable. It isn't seen as this male-dominated thing, or even the nature of projects isn't, not everybody is building some sort of action game. Girls do like to build action games, but maybe it's more around their interests. That becomes a lot more accessible and doesn't have kind of quite a high dropout rate, or people are more willing to explore it. And I see specifically in the CoderDojo girls sessions, those have been really key to that.
So I guess there are times where you silo the girls, because I know I was privy to some of the data early on that seemed to indicate that at a certain age, was it 10 or 11, that 80% of the girls just fell off.
Yeah, I think we did see that, and which is quite upsetting, because you kind of look at a large part of the gender imbalance in tech, and you're kind of saying, well, how do we solve that? I think there's been a lot of different mechanics or tactics to try and increase retention, which has been successful. Definitely creating an environment that has been largely female is less, there's less friction or less of a barrier to entry, and increasingly having more and more mentors who are female, and now as the movement is 7 years old, and girls who learned to code through are mentors and are teaching and are those champions or idols. That's been a large reason for an increase in retention.
I'll ask you a half rhetorical question, which is why is it so important that these kids should code? So you can give me half an answer if you want.
So the half an answer. every second word, or in what sense? This is where it may challenging. Right. So I think it's coding itself is, we're going to hit a point of programmer saturation, and there's going to be a point where programming is not as commoditized a skill that it is. So what is interesting, and I mean, we see all the basics now. Oh, I built another social network, I built another app, or whatever. What is important is when coding is a secondary skill and somebody goes into agriculture or goes into politics and can see opportunities to apply programming there, or even their prowess. Even it's important to find out these kids hate programming. I mean, in Ireland alone, computer science is something like a almost like a 60% dropout / failure rate from people who don't know what it is or have like the wrong idea about it. So it's important for a number of ways, and I think what's interesting is, and we've seen this in cases. We have an event called Coolest Projects where kids come together. Like one entry the year before last was a girl whose family were beekeepers, so she built a beehive and put 8 sensors in it and could monitor all these activities and find out why bees are dying. And like in her project bio was that 70% of our food depends on bees, so if they die, we're stuck, which I think in the words of a 12-year-old is stuck is maybe polite. So seeing it applied in all those different contexts, or even them going through life and saying, okay, well, we could build something to do that, or there's probably a problem here, or even just like spotting inefficiencies and knowing that it can be better. I think that's why it's quite important. And I think necessarily also the dojo environment and all these kids learning in a social manner. It's not just about programming. It's about kids working in teams. At the end of each session, kids will stand up and present what they've done, so they get used to presenting and showing off their work. Peer-led learning is quite important, being project-based. So there's kind of a variety of things where coding is one part, but it's more of a means to an end.
Okay, good. Is this self-sufficient? Where does the money come from? I mean, do these local dojos, do they rely on help from the mothership, so to speak? Or
So we started it off as a open source movement. For context, it began in a very grassroots, organic way. When I was about 16 or 17, I won this iPod Nano, and was the first to find
Which you hacked, right?
Yeah, so I was like the first to find an exploit in it. And in reality, it was like load some configuration files and whatever. But like, I think to the Apple blogs and the fanboys, they were like, damn, some schoolboy did an Apple, which was maybe sounded a lot more impressive. So then when people in my school heard this, they were like, well, if that idiot at Whelton can program, surely we all can. So I started teaching 40 people twice a week after school how to build websites and apps, and we had that different environment and pedagogy, just because people approached me. And then once I think that they saw that it was accessible, we had people from other schools who came to my school who wanted to do it, and then there was kind of concerns what would happen in the summer and after I left secondary school. So we started that one club outside and kept all those principles and a few other things, and it spread from there. So very much so, starting off, we felt that money can often be poisonous to things. As soon as you introduce, and I think you're a person who talks a lot about value, as soon as you add money to something or fee, you're associating a value with it, and then there's expectations and so on. So by making it free and getting, like, say, a local space from the library, or if there's a business that has a canteen where they want to contribute, it added a new dynamic. CoderDojo is all volunteer-based. It's completely free to all these children, has been, forever will be, and it created a certain dynamic and ethic. So,
I mean, is that a rule you impose on the community that they can't charge? And
absolutely. So there is, some dojos can have donations, but that's never solicited. It's if a parent wants to. We never wanted to make that environment where, even selling a T-shirt, right? We didn't want to create a culture where some kid had the CoderDojo T-shirt and this other kid didn't have it, and they were putting pressure on their parent. And while the parent, might kind of feel a bit uncomfortable with, maybe having to buy that T-shirt, or might feel some sort of requirement to donate to it, and as a result.
Do you sell the T-shirts?
No,
because my son has one, and little ninjas on it. And
black market.
Yeah, you could sell them.
There we go. Maybe that's what we
Can I start printing them myself, or do you control the copyright? Do you
sell them out of the back of a car?
Yeah.
So no, and even things like the copyright. We hold that in the foundation. It's all very kind of controlled to be for the community and be open source. So in short, it's the construct of it is all free. That's where the goodwill comes from. As a result, parents don't use it as a babysitting service. They have to stay there with their kid in the majority of the time. So we have a very different value, premise of value there. And then it being an open source movement and leveraging a lot of I guess like communities and different tools, if the foundation component itself died, the entire movement could continue. So when we built it, we weren't in the same way that it was organic, and we never had this kind of artificial or vanity metric approach to say, well, it's going to be in X countries or whatever. Right. We were kind of thinking, well, how do we build something that could be for 50 years, 100 years, or whatever?
So where does the money come from?
Sorry, no.
I mean,
no. I mean, there is for the foundation component. So about a year in, I started the foundation after seeing that I don't know, maybe there's 100 of these clubs or something, and seeing that I was kind of like sleeping on couches and floors and moving around, and I felt that if there was a structured entity that we could probably do a lot more in terms of facilitating the community and creating a platform and creating tools. So we started the foundation then, and we've had like a number of supporters and funders, Microsoft, Salesforce, the foundation today employs about 20 people. We merged with the Raspberry Pi Foundation last year.
How did that happen?
Which?
The Raspberry Pi.
Raspberry Pi. I think Raspberry Pi, they produce these credit card-sized computers. They are a non-profit. Their whole, motive or agenda is also to make computing accessible. And there was a lot of alignment between the organizations. And we thought long and hard about, okay, well, number one, our guiding light has always been what is best to get young people coding, or to give the opportunity to young people to code. And often, we thought, well, does it make sense to merge? There's a lot of shared functions. So we had a long conversation with them and back and forth. So it was pretty symbiotic. It was like finding someone on Twitter described it. It was like when two of your best friends get married.
Yeah.
Which was nice.
Empowering 500,000 kids with the gift of coding is no small feat. And I'm just thinking, do you not have governments tripping over themselves to help out with this?
Yeah, we have. I think there's been very. CoderDojo, while 7 years young 7 years old, is still quite young, and I think they're kind of maybe like 500,000 young people through either who have kind of decided that this is their thing and have gotten really deep into it. That's a spectrum. There's also kids who've been exposed to it and know what it is. There's some kids who, as I said, found out that they absolutely hate computer science and maybe detest computers. So we are at a point now where we're at 1,900 and something dojos, where we have countries, let's say like Japan, where there's 150 dojos, where they've created regional bodies, and they've created more structure. So increasingly there has been kind of cooperation with governments. But again, I know at least in Ireland starting off, we were kind of always very careful about where we stood with governments, and we've done a lot of work with the EU. I think that computing will come naturally into the classroom, that we will see it there. Maybe a large part of CoderDojo is the joy and the fun of computing, and by not having to have strict curriculum, and again, not having this expectation. It's like some kids go to CoderDojo, not that they love coding, it's a fun place to be, and their friends are there, which is as important, that kind of sense of identity. So I think the future of it is it will become, it is already a place to learn, but very much so people who are very passionate about it and like the community.
So I think it's clear this is a successful tech story, but like many social entrepreneurs, it didn't make you fabulously wealthy. But what's interesting, so I've known him since he was considerably younger. So all he ever knew was making the world a better place and helping out, and he really did. But then, this is the exciting part, is when he moves to the Middle East, Dubai, to start actual businesses and companies, and very motivated by generating profit, right? So
that was maybe from one extreme to another. So I went out to the Middle East, and I think one of the experiences in starting a nonprofit and a movement was that while it was exciting, at heart I was a technologist. I think the common denominator that I've seen with people who start nonprofits and charities is often they know the problem intimately and can kind of devise a solution to it, but they don't know all the governance or the management and all that around it, which was in my case. I knew about being a young person who really loved coding, and but didn't know about running an organization. And I think 3 years in that became clear, whereas 21, didn't know what a KPI was, didn't know how to manage people. And I felt that in one part, the foundation at least needed somebody with that background and experience. And we hired in a new CEO, Mary, who's ex-Accenture and had all that governance and organizational background. And for me, I felt it was important to go be an environment where, one, I could self-actualize in the technology sense, so continue building apps and systems and so on, and then two, also build a skill set in terms of management, organization, and so on.
You were into everything, flower business, you were selling bedding, you had a huge e-commerce platform for markets, right?
Yeah, so I went out there to become CTO of the largest daily deal site in the Middle East at first, which had a fair bit of imposter syndrome, but fortunately held my own. And then after
Did you fake it till you made it?
Pretty much. I know nothing about computers. So after a year, that was acquired, and then spent 2 years investigating different things and built a number of e-commerce businesses. I found e-commerce as my home, and then over the last 2 years, we built the largest online supermarket in the Middle East and hit number 7 in the App Store. I took Arabic classes for 3 months to be able to read and write, and I have my La Ataqalam Arabiya Jayed, that's my party piece. So that was, I think, from like equally important as doing the non-profit world and understanding it. I now have a better perspective on building organizations and a whole range of disciplines.
But don't you feel dirty? Don't you feel like you've left behind
being a capitalist instead of a social entrepreneur?
Absolutely.
I think balance. I think I'm maybe net. There's big talk about being carbon neutral. I think I'm maybe socially neutral.
Are you ready to come back to the world of social entrepreneurship now that you've lined your pockets with all that filthy cash?
Yeah, who knows? Well, but I do think that it's an interesting question as well. When you're social entrepreneurship, there's almost and like there was accolades for it. I felt a pressure. I got Forbes 30 under 30 for being a social entrepreneur, and became what was the youngest Ashoka Fellow, which is like. There's people up there who are Nobel Peace Prize winners and dismantle landmines, and one of my greatest accolades at the time was like a kickflip. So I felt a lot of pressure and maybe to a degree almost pigeonholed as I have to be this quote unquote do-gooder and kumbaya. So it was nice to kind of get in and flex and build up that skill set. And I guess I'll see where we find
out. And Ireland, like Norway, small country, a few million people, so you have any modicum of success and you're omnipresent in the press. So I think that was probably a nice thing to get out of Ireland for a while, yeah?
Yeah, it was good. And I think also seeing different places. I mean, being in the Middle East, spending time in Dubai and Saudi, working across a variety of countries and seeing different cultures, different circumstances, different economic situations was pretty eye-opening. Yeah. It gave me a lot of a reflection and appreciation of what we have and constructs, but then also seeing the opportunity that's there.
Sounds good. And I have to ask, what's next?
I don't know. So I have taken a year out. I'm going to go live in Japan and just reading, playing guitar.
You were studying Japanese, I saw, yeah.
There we go, and Duolingo.
Okay, good.
I can't really, only like 3 days ago because you mentioned it, so I was like, all right. Maybe it sounds more impressive than it is. Okay. But I think it's a point of reflection, and maybe having been in between those two worlds, take stock, take a year out, no pressure, and then figure out what's next.
Amazing. Anybody have questions for this brilliant mind that's right next to me here? This is your opportunity, maybe the last ever, before he disappears into the abyss of lost in translation.
That almost sounds premeditated, which is worrying.
Anybody want to know what it takes to be a successful social entrepreneur? Or?
Yeah. So I wanted to know, you say you moved to Middle East, right? So just what do you see as the future of the Middle East in terms of startups as well as just the economic conditions inside that?
Yeah, I think the Middle East has been interesting in terms of you have so one, there's been great economic change. One with if we say specifically the GCC, which is where I can't kind of really speak about like Southeast Asia or the wider area around, despite the fact a large part of the workforce come from there, and there's a heavy dependence on India and Pakistan. So GCC, a lot of change. They introduced VAT for the first time. And they've, as a result of kind of the change in oil and a lack of really government support, they're becoming a lot more self-reliant. And we kind of see the opening of the economic city, which is the first place in Saudi where foreigners can own Saudi companies. It's a lot of change. There's a lot more self-reliance. So I think services and infrastructure, when we built this online supermarket, there was next to nowhere that did 2-hour delivery, for example. And also there wasn't conventional neighborhood mapping. So we had to build out all mapping systems so we could deliver properly and build out logistics. So I see a lot of infrastructure as being the core. And then also a lot of move away from, let's say, like typical reliance on government and oil and so on. And then you take a look at like the UAE, particularly Dubai, which is heavily reliant on tourism. They're trying to diversify and encourage startups. So it's probably, I think I probably wouldn't be the best person to ask in a macro sense, but definitely a lot of indigenous business and being more self-reliant, I guess. There's been so much like external reliance for such a long time that they're now trying to become more entrepreneur-friendly, make it easier to set up companies. Visas has been a big one that they're adjusting, and I think out of that platform is what they'll see. It will shape that future.
Again, before this overachiever fully burns out, this is your opportunity to ask him some questions. Absolutely.
So when you went from like nonprofits to for-profits, do you feel like there's any change in the way you manage yourself, like how you work and how you spend your time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when I went in nonprofits, it can be very difficult to quantify things. You often talk about metrics in terms of impact. You know, how many children are we affecting? How many lives have we reached, and so on. And that can be difficult to quantify. Unlike being in a for-profit, and particularly that's VC funded, everything is very, everything is KPI driven. Everything is based on ROI and profit. It's all very transactional, and as a result, a lot of the emotion is removed from it. And that was one of the biggest things that I struggled with at the start. Was almost this like extreme level of accountability versus prior. It was just kind of like, oh yeah, helping the children, yeah, like whatever if I'm 5 minutes late, they're benefiting. So I think that made me go back and think a lot about when looking at nonprofits. A lot of the terminology that we use in for-profits, and again, the term social entrepreneur, it's using these entrepreneur tactics. What is when somebody has an idea to help someone, what is the value proposition? What is the differentiator? What is the sustainability about it? You know, I think it's almost like an appropriate level of cynicism that I've now looked at social endeavors where you can kind of look past the goodwill and intention and look at the sustainability and viability and scalability of it. I mean, if anyone does something in the social sphere, it's fantastic. It's good. That's what we should be encouraging. But when we talk about systematic change, it definitely put a new lens. And then me personally as well, learning a lot more about managing people and getting ROI. Those were just natural skill sets that I took.
I have a quick question. It occurred to me that when you're the founder of an organization that teaches young children how to code, I imagine you have to be quite aware of your public, your online presence. Wouldn't look too good if there were like photos of you stumbling out of a club, Is
this where you produce a photo? Yeah.
Oh, I've got photos. I've got photos. But I mean, is that something that concerned you, or that you're less concerned about now, or do you still have to be concerned about that?
Yeah, I definitely think I did. Particularly when you're doing something like there's about I think now each kind of week or regularly there's about 60,000 kids that do it at a given time, and there's about 12,000 volunteers. And when you work with a particularly large volunteer organization, if you have this founder role, you don't want to do something that kind of damages the organization. I felt a lot of pressure back then, almost to the degree of paranoia, where if I get blackout drunk in a club, or I punch on my, something like that happens. Yeah, that could never happen to somebody.
Not a young Irish lad.
That would reflect poorly in the organization, and then as a result, not only are you letting yourself down, but you're letting down all these volunteers, and you have to stand for it and whatever. And all of a sudden, you're kind of 18 and afraid to go outside. So fortunately, no one really cares what you do in life, and nothing really matters, which is great.
Oh.
Right? There's a bit of stoicism.
That's a good talk to have.
Yeah. But I think that there was an important thing that when I stepped away, that the organization grew. There's 20 people in the foundation. It's far beyond me now, which is fantastic. But there was that very real pressure. And I think that there is a degree of, at least with young people, I'm known, and if I do something, young people will see it. So I do. Sure. I have to be responsible around it, but then at the same time, it makes me kind of question what would be the actions that I would be concerned about doing that would reflect poorly.
Yeah. One more question, maybe attack this kid's moral fiber somehow? Anybody? Yeah.
I'm curious, as now, you've done all this amazing work, you've founded this organization, you've made some money, and you've decided to take a year off, lost in translation. Is there any part of you that is worried about your relevance?
Ooh. Yes.
Moving forward, and your brand?
Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh.
any,
And this photo, what? Why is that a theme?
and any part of you sitting there thinking, am I going to be relevant again, and am I going to get back into the rat race, and how is that going to be perceived?
Good question.
Yeah, so the funny thing was, so it's really topical, and that's been on my mind a lot recently. I think this is falling off. So when I decided to basically take a break, and in fairness, I was pretty burnt out, and we built up something quite big, like the online supermarket that we built. We brought 10 supermarkets online, like 1.5 million downloads, peaking like 250 staff, so it was quite big. I went from a CTO role to an MD role, and then wanted to take a break because I was pretty burnt out. For the first 2 months, I actually felt incredibly insecure, because for so long I was part of an organization or some attachment, or I'd be like, hello, I'm James Whelton, I'm X, Y, and Z, or whatever. So I reflected a lot about that, and then also as when we were talking about how you'd be afraid if you appeared badly to someone, I think that was entrenched in insecurity. I used to be very afraid of what people would think about me, and then even to the point where, if a minor example, if someone would say, have you heard of such and such band? I'd be like, yeah. I'd say yes, because I wouldn't want to detract from their story, and then maybe be more likable. So that's a lot of stuff I had to throw away. So I think in a wider part around relevance and that kind of place of fear, I've stopped coming from it from a place of fear. I guess if I am irrelevant, that's my problem, and I'm just gonna have to work harder.
What is relevance? You just mean like in the news, or that people talk about?
I'm talking about, I think you've covered it a little bit, but being a founder myself, you get very wrapped up in your own brand.
Yeah.
And
Google alerts.
The notoriety of it. I guess my follow-on question would be, what are you trying to find in Japan?
Myself. And hopefully some really good fish. It's actually something that I've always wanted to do, and a fascination, and I've never gone to somewhere for an extended period of time. Also just go hiking, stay in some hostels, going up and down. There's also a lot of CoderDojos there, so I'm going to go visit them. So I think maybe at this point, I'm turned 26 at the end of this month, and having kind of done these two things, I'm acutely aware of things kind of work in 3 to 4 year cycles. So if I do another business or join something, that's probably going to be the age of 27 to 30, and then 30 is probably going to be a formative time. Typically want to get settled down and married. So I think maybe this is the year I want to reflect, set a precedence, and make sure my value set and principles, having been on both extremes of the spectrum, are in check. And if I can go to bed soundly at night, then that's my KPI.
Lovely. Let's say sayonara to James Whelton.